Welcome to the Nativity Podcast, where we give listeners a behind-the-scenes look into the life of our active Catholic parish here in Burke, Virginia. How can we help you grow in your own faith? Listen to find out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 3. I really did make that sound like the podcast.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nativity Podcast. That isn't the podcast. All right, we're going to fix that.
Okay.
That's why I added it. I thought that was not happening.
Welcome back, everybody, to week 3 of our Advent Reflection series. We are traveling and preparing for Christmas by talking about different kind of parts of the Advent season, things that help us pray, kind of some strategies and all those kinds of things, and really just kind of focusing on the amazing meditations that the gospel gives us as we get ready for Christmas at Nativity, which I know Christmas is every day at Nativity, but in a special way, we're getting ready by spending every week over the next 4 weeks getting ready for Christmas and getting ready to welcome Christ in our hearts.
Yeah, that's right. I love what you said right there about traveling.
Yeah.
I like that, how you slipped that in.
I slid it in. Traveling is key, right? Because we're journeying, in many ways, we're journeying to Bethlehem, and we're kind of going to Bethlehem, but we're also kind of journeying through our prayer life and everything. I am Father Ed Bresnahan, parochial vicar here at Nativity.
I am your director of social media, Mary Castellano, and we are joined this week and during our Advent series by
Alison Fram, director of college, young adult, and young family ministries.
She has the most titles of all of us.
Yeah.
Baptism coordinator.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
We got a few.
It's exciting.
Friends, for those of you who don't know, we have a wonderful staff. I think this. Let me sort of step back for just a moment. At Nativity, we have a huge amount of ministries. We have a huge number of things that our parish does. We have a very active parish, and our people are incredible, and they do so many things. And in order to kind of keep everything straight, in order to keep everything at least organized and make sure that people have advocates from their groups and ministries to the church proper, it's always helpful to have a wonderful staff, and we have an incredible staff. And in our staff, our people have a number of different roles. And Alison is definitely one of those people who is just so well connected to the community that you have extra titles, not because it's some royal, it's a, you are the Margrave.
Dame Alison Fram.
Margrave of such and such, I don't know, Marquis de such and such.
I'm going to add that on after
You
this.
should, absolutely. But it does reflect the fact that you are really wonderful at actually connecting with so many different members of our parish. So while we joke, friends,
Father.
Oh, you're welcome. While we joke a little bit about having a lot of titles, it's a good thing to know that the ministries really trust Alison to do a lot of the amazing work that helps them be fruitful. I was trying to say fruition and fruitful at the same time.
Yeah,
so it almost came as fruition.
Advocate. That's a good word.
Yeah,
I like
advocate.
That. We're all advocates
Yeah.
for you, for our wonderful listeners.
Our wonderful listeners.
And I think one of the other things that we have here that I know I'm really appreciative of is our sense of joy, our genuine, just really authentic joy that I've noticed in the parishioners here. I'm kind of an honorary parishioner for people who don't know. I know I've said this on the Nativity podcast before, but I'm the random outsider. I'm from Maryland. So
But you're part of the family now,
yes,
Mary.
I'm a part of the family.
We're
but
trying to get her to come to Virginia, where she can come for all of our holidays.
That's right. Yeah, but we do have a genuine, Nativity does have a really genuine kind of sense of joy and welcome, which is one of the things that I love, and I love telling people about where I work. So I think that leads us beautifully into Gaudete Sunday.
Exactly, and it's such a good thing. So here we are, third week of Advent, and this is the one where the priest wears rose. I'm not going to make the joke. I know that everybody always tries. It's almost it's like a dad joke that has to be said. But, I'm going to let it sit. I'm going to let it sit there and I'm going to let it ride, where all the people who come to the family dinner know that the story that dad's probably going to tell, So you all know it. If you know the joke, you know the joke. But we're just going to leave it be. If you know, you know. But otherwise, I'm not going to, cloud the joy of our experience here talking about the third Sunday, which is just a really corny dad joke. If you really want it, come email us or talk to
I
us,
was
and
going
I'll
to say,
tell
if
you
you're
later.
confused, it has to do with the color that they wear.
Yeah.
But you notice that something's different, right? We're halfway through the Advent season. We've done 2 weeks already. We're kicking off the 3rd week, so we're halfway through, and it's a penitential season, and we wear darker colors, right? We wear the purple, we wear the violet, right? And it's a little bit more penitential, a little bit, maybe not quite so much as Lent, but it's still in the same vibe. And so it's not one of those things where we're worried that people are going to run out of steam, but it's important to stay focused that even though it's penitential, and even though we're definitely focused on the idea of the coming of Christ at the end of time, the reality of judgment, we're also looking forward to a very particular joy-filled holiday. The fact that the light of the world is about to join and is about to become among us and live with us. So the priest wears a brighter color. We celebrate rejoicing, and we actually talk about joy, which is an amazing thing. Ladies, what does joy mean to you?
Oh, that's a great
Wow,
question,
what a good
Alison.
question. Well, when you were talking, I was thinking about the Advent wreath. I grew up with the Advent wreath, and I always got excited for the pink Sunday. I hoped to be the one to be able to light the candles for that. But I think, especially growing as an adult, joy, I think this is something that is probably commonly talked about, but it's not just happiness. I think a lot of people just assume, in order to celebrate Christmas, in order to get into Advent, those lucky people just feel happy all the time. But if I don't feel that way, then I'm missing out, or I'm not able to celebrate joy. So I was just thinking about, for me, being able to really bring that into prayer, that if my emotions are not happy, if things are challenging, that doesn't mean that I can't enter into this week when we focus on joy. Yeah, that's kind of my base.
That's such a powerful
that.
idea, too, because I feel like it's a rising trend in our world where people are almost trying to temper your joy and tell you not to be as happy and not to be as joyful in the season because it's insensitive to people for whom Christmas is very difficult, right? And so people will say, like, okay, the Christmas season is very difficult for some of us. It's not easy. We're dealing with loss. We're dealing with tragedy. We don't have the joy and the goodness of families to come through. But I think the way that you talked about it makes a lot more sense. And it says this, it says, no matter what's going on the outside, we still have something joyful to celebrate, independent of whether all of our family is there or whether we have all of the people that we would hope to be around our Christmas table, or maybe there is drama in the family or difficulty or heartache or a breakup or something like that. Yeah, for sure there are difficulties in the world, but those difficulties don't have to temper the joy that Christmas reminds us of.
Yeah. And I was reminded of a specific prayer experience where I had a couple years ago, my dad was very sick and he was in the hospital. And I remember I was driving myself to Georgetown Hospital, and the Christmas music was playing. It was a couple weeks before Christmas, and just feeling so angry.
Yeah.
How could everyone else be so happy? This Christmas music, I'm now going to associate with this horrible thing, and seeing Christmas trees and being so angry about that. And then going back, and at the time, I mentioned this in a previous one of our episodes, but just journaling has been important for me. And journaling about, how could Christmas be so happy for everybody else and it's not for me? And really just coming to that feeling of, what, I still have God. I can still celebrate the fact that Jesus came to the earth. He knows what suffering is. So I can still enter into the Christmas season. And just because Christmas is hard this particular year doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. God does redeem that for us, and you can still have joy even in harder experiences. So that's just, for me, that was a personal growth moment when I realized that difference between just happy and joy. And I'm sure other people have similar experiences.
Yeah. What that kind of reminds me of is, I think in I don't know if it was episode 1 or 2, we definitely talked about waiting, and how a couple years back we had asked our young adults to write down or share a time where there was waiting. And I think when we were doing that series, I had shared about my experience waiting to get a job after I graduated college. And kind of toward the end of my sharing, I mentioned to people that, once I got my job, my first job out of college was here working at Nativity. I had a very different role back then. I was working more as Alison's assistant and assistant to our director of youth ministry at the time. And it was a really good job, a very joyful job, very joyful work. But I'm sure there are a lot of you out there who can relate to that transition, going from college student to your first time working as an adult. It can also be very challenging. And work-life balance, dealing with a commute, like just because something is challenging doesn't mean it's not good. And there can be underlying joy, even though there might be struggles kind of on the top. You all can't see. I'm motioning
She's
with my
doing hand
hands
motions to go
like
along
a
with
cake.
this.
Imagine like layers of a
Layers.
cake. You know, it's like you got like the base is, you know, joy, and then on top you might have some struggle or some challenge. But at the end of the day, you know, once you kind of dig a little bit deeper, you get past, you know, that first layer, there can be an underlying layer of joy.
There's a wonderful book that C.S. Lewis wrote on. It was his reflections. It's a very small book, but it was his reflections on the death of his wife, and it's called. The book is called A Grief Observed. And in one of them, he talks about and part of the reflection is he tries to talk about where the goodness of God exists in that difficult moment. And he says that part of it is like, it has the same feeling of like going to the dentist, which, and he says it in such a brilliantly British way. And it's so funny because it's like, obviously nobody wakes up in the morning saying, yes, I'm so excited about going to the dentist today, right? And getting your teeth pulled. It's not a fun thing, but in the middle of it, you realize that there is a goodness to it, and there's a better in the long run sense. And I think that idea of being able to see what's good in the long run allows us to kind of handle even the difficult things because we're looking forward to something more substantial. I think that's got to be at the root of this joy and happiness thing, right? Is that happiness, I don't want to like make a distinction that says that joy is one thing and happiness is another. They are different, but I think joy is something that's more rooted internally and a fruit of the Holy Spirit, whereas happiness can go either way, right? We can root our happiness in something that's authentic, in which case our joy does bring a happiness in the Lord, right? But then also we can put that happiness and put that search for happiness in something that doesn't actually satisfy us, right? And Jesus even says, why work for something that doesn't satisfy?
Yeah.
Right. And so regularly the Lord is talking to us about this idea of looking forward to what God wants to give us in joy, as opposed to whatever temporary good we have or whatever temporary experience we have. And so that idea of looking forward to it, that's where that authentic happiness is going to come, right? A happiness that's rooted in the very core of our being, and a happiness that's rooted in the joy that the Lord gives us in our through the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me, Father, of we talked about the gospel readings. We're reflecting on those, but actually the first reading from this Sunday of Advent from Isaiah, and the first couple lines I think are just such a beautiful image. It says, the desert and parched land will exalt. The steep will rejoice and bloom. The steppe will rejoice and bloom. They will bloom with abundant flowers and rejoice with joyful song. And the whole desert and parched land to bloom with abundant flowers. I think that's just such a beautiful image of our spiritual life. And for me, you know, towards the end of the calendar year, I am typically like, okay, I am dry land. Like, I'm tired. I'm ready for a new year. I'm ready to set new goals. You know, people get into New Year's resolutions and things. But I think also to realize like God works through that dry land. And maybe if you as a listener are looking for a prayer practice, kind of just think about that. What feels dry and parched in your life? That's kind of having those images are something that helped me in my personal prayer, you know, thinking like, God, what is, you know, if I have a garden, if my heart or my soul is a garden, this is the area that feels incredibly dry, and it kind of is scary to let you go there because I feel like it's going to hurt. But if you're promising me joy and abundant blooms from that verse, you know, how are you maybe working in that? And I can find joy in that experience.
That's beautiful. I love how you mentioned that. You're like, you have some areas of your heart where you don't want the Lord to see. You don't want to let him go. If you imagine like a house and there's one closet that's particularly messy, or you shove all your dirty laundry under your bed or something. You're like, no, I don't want my guests to see this. And it's like our hearts can kind of be like that too. I very recently had a moment like this. I won't go into the whole story, but it was funny because, again, as Alison and I've shared, we both love journaling. And I remember journaling about it and being like, Lord, I wasn't going to let you into this particular part, but you're all knowing. You already know about it, so I might as well just bring it up to you. In that moment of just that, like, kind of self-awareness, bringing it fully to him, it felt really freeing, but it also felt kind of like, I felt very much like a child bringing something up to a parent, kind of like a little kid who thinks they're getting away with something. The parent is like staring at the kid doing whatever they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love how you bring that up. It's like, what kind of areas of our kind of own spiritual garden need more attention maybe from the Lord? I don't know exactly where you were planning on kind of going with that, but
Well, one of the things that I just love about the image of the desert is that, I mean, I feel like I read this in a biology textbook once, but it was like, plants and animals adapt to the environment that they're in. And so plants that are used to not having water, right? They learn how to store it. Whenever you see cactuses and things like cacti, whenever you see those things, you know, they're particularly suited to being in dry, and they survive and thrive. They dry up, they shrivel up, they just kind of do their thing. But they also learn how to take advantage very rapidly for whatever water is given. And so when you see like when you read the stories here of the desert blooming, it's a fascinating thing to watch, because one rainstorm or one moment when the water comes down out of the mountains to water the area, the desert area, all those plants suddenly go into almost a hyperactive mode. They're like, okay, we got water. Let's go, right? And so everything, birds, plants, animals, all of the different things, they just like leap into action at the moment that there's water, because they might not know when the next one is coming. And so unlike when you kind of, I mean, we kind of, you know, we live here in an area that's very forested, and it has a very natural cycle, and there's some trees that are just green all along, certain flowers that just kind of regularly bloom, and so we don't really kind of have a sense of, you know, there's not really like a fervor to it, right? But over there, it's just blooms with intensity. You go from nothing to everything so quickly. And it's amazing, because I love how that speaks to what God does in our hearts. Those dry places of our hearts, it's just important to be able to say like, okay, but God is going to work with whatever we give him. So if you give him even just a fraction of that desert, if you give him just a little bit, then God's going to work in that desert, right? God's going to make that desert bloom even with just a little bit of water.
Yeah, and the concept that, I think this came up in past conversations, but God has more than enough. He can abundantly water, if we're going with the image, those dry places. And maybe
like,
especially
like tied down, right? I think we can't limit him.
Yeah, especially around maybe the Christmas season. There's some of that comparison comes in. Oh, this person over here is always lucky. They always get what they want. You know, they have no problems in life. But to, again, in prayer, just be honest. And maybe, I know we mentioned journaling, if that's not your thing, like vocal conversation prayer, just talking aloud to God when you're driving in your car, or if you hear, you know, listening to music can be a great way, even just like put on a song. But anyway, just to be honest with God about that and say, I feel like I'm not receiving what other people are receiving, and just be honest with him.
It's also good. It's also good not to swing the pendulum the other way, because sometimes during the Christmas season we can say to ourselves, well, I don't need to pray for myself because I'm worried that other people have it worse, as if God somehow is like tied down and has to do some triage to say, well, I can't help you. Yeah. You're only medium level need. I've got people in other parts of the world that really need prayers right now, so I don't have time for you. That's not really how God operates.
Right. He's got enough for everybody.
He's got enough for everybody. So we can compare ourselves and say, you know, I can't believe that God doesn't answer my prayers. And then we also don't want to be sort of stuck in that spot where we think that, you know, God doesn't have time for me either. Of course, God has time for you. One thing I think too, going right along with what you said about journaling, vocal prayer, all those different things, especially if there's a moment when you're in a dry state, all the more reason to make sure that you stick to it like a discipline, right? It's
definitely.
I think the two times when people sort of fall off the rails with prayer is when things are good and they forget. So they're like, hey, things are good. I don't need to ask God for anything, so I forget. Yeah. Or when things are bad and they're just like, well, God's not really answering anyway. So, or I don't feel like I'm getting much out of my prayer, right? It feels like a desert in that sense. And in both of those situations, all the more reason to dive into consistency in prayer.
Consistency.
So,
That's definitely been, I don't know about you, Mary, but that's definitely been the case for me. I struggle with wanting to just, well, this isn't working, so let's just take a break and come back to maybe praying later. But to actually work through that, and then of course, the sacraments as Catholics, those are beautiful opportunities to be with the Lord. Coming to church, that's one of my favorite things, is just to come when the church is quiet during the week and to sit. The Lord is still present in the Eucharist. That's beautiful. And I think we can underestimate the power of just a walk outside. Mm-hmm. Your body is moving, so your mind is also able to, for me at least, kind of sift through things in a different way. And once you kind of work through some of that stuff, then maybe you can experience more of that, the joy, and be reminded the struggles are there, but also here's all the things I totally forgot to be grateful for. Here's all the things that, God is helping me through. I see growth here.
And I don't know about you guys with your friends, but sometimes I just want to just be with my friends.
Absolutely.
I don't have to say anything or do anything. I don't have to expect some magical experience every time I'm hanging out with my friends. Sometimes it's just kind of being there and just spending the time with a friend, and it's perfect. It's exactly what it needed to be. So if your prayer's dry and you feel like you're not getting anything out of it, well, maybe it's just, this is the kind of time when you just need a friend to just to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if this might also be a good time to try something new. Just if you are kind of in that place, that dry space, you're I just don't really know how to get out. Maybe just pick one thing. It just comes to mind. Allison was saying kind of about how she, going to mass, and I know, Allison, you like to go to daily mass, right? Mm-hmm. So I recently started trying to figure out how to fit daily mass back into my schedule, because for me that's kind of the thing, is sometimes I would get kind of off the prayer wagon if my schedule kind of changes, or especially if I'm not feeling well. Mm-hmm. That's the kicker for me. If I get a cold one week and I kind of I fall asleep early, or if I'm just headspace, I'm foggy or whatever, and I kind of slowly get out of the habit of praying regularly, for me, that's where kind of the devil comes in. But one of the ways that I can kind of combat that is what I've worked right now into my weekly schedule is I work 2 days from home, and I'm really fortunate. I live within walking distance of my home parish. Mm-hmm. And
so, me too. I live in walking distance of my parish. That's incredible.
I work in walking distance from my parish.
And so I've made it a habit to attend my home parish daily mass, and I've found so much fruit in that. I actually really like sitting by myself, kind of toward the back where I can see everybody. And it's so interesting. I'm in kind of a special circumstance where I work at a church that I don't consider my home parish, mm-hmm. whereas you, Alison, you grew up here at Nativity, mm-hmm. but I have found I feel so much more connected to the community of my home parish, even by just seeing the backs of their heads, mm-hmm. And just participating with them. It was something Deacon Kelly actually said in I think it was season 2 of our podcast. He was saying that every once in a while, it's really important for him, even as a deacon, to participate as a member of the congregation, mm-hmm. just to feel and be a part of the community of the family and participate in the sacrament in that way. So anyway, all that to be said is I have actively, that is kind of, I focused on that one thing, which was incorporate daily mass into my regular schedule. So it wasn't pray a holy hour, 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something mm-hmm. major like that, because I recognized there was a need in my heart and in my schedule. Where can I adjust and make room? I'm just trying to say, if you feel like you're in a place where you have a lot of that desert, and maybe you're at that point where you're sick of Christmas music and you're I'm kind of done with this. And, if you feel like you're in that desert place, then maybe this could be a really great time right before Christmas. Just try and incorporate one thing, mm-hmm. one spiritual practice or habit, and just kind of see where that takes you through Christmas and through the new year.
That's great that you said that one thing too, Mary, because I think, again, I'm someone who I love to check off lists and, mm-hmm. ooh, look, I did this, and this. And I was at a place a couple years ago that I was going to daily mass 4 days a week. And that's just not my experience anymore, that I go that often. Mm-hmm. And just being okay with that's okay. But I'm mm-hmm. still able to make the choice that I will still go to daily mass on these days, or maybe it's confession. That's a big one for me. And my biggest tip, my mom taught it to me, confession and then ice cream. So you make it a fun thing. But if you put that on your calendar, maybe once during Advent, you want to embrace the joy by going to confession. And maybe if it's scary for you, you invite someone to go with you, go get some ice cream after. And, that could be a nice way to celebrate the season.
I love that. I love being able to do just one thing, but I think sometimes I really appreciate what you said about not wanting to check boxes, right? I think a good thing to always evaluate if we're trying to do those things is take a look at what our habits are, right? We shouldn't be afraid to go back to our habits and be able to say, all right, what kind of fruitfulness is going on with this, right? And it goes back to the desert, right? Is this thing that I'm doing stuck in the desert? Am I just doing this because, am I just going to Mass in order to check a box? Or am I really reaping the benefits and getting the fruit from this? Or just simply I couldn't imagine my life without the Eucharist. So, then it's no longer about checking a box, but rather it's as natural as breathing.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of circling back a little bit to Alison's point about confession, I think even just the experience of confession kind of really beautifully goes with what we're talking about of you enter, you're kind of feeling like you're in a desert, and when you walk out, you're filled with all this abundant grace, like you were describing, Father.
The water.
You're I love that vision of the cactus. That's really sticking clearly in my mind. And I know, at least for me, I don't know about the two of you, but when I go into the confession line, I'm I might be reading the examination of conscience, and I'm okay, let me, like you were saying, check the box. Okay, yep, I did that. No, I didn't do that one. But no, I got to write that one. I got to make sure I tell the priest that. But then when I walk out, it's I kind of can mentally rip up that page, or and it's just this absolute freeing sense, weight has been lifted off of my shoulders. And friends, if you haven't been to confession in a while, please know that it is absolutely okay for you to go. We encourage you, we invite you to go this Advent season. And I think this episode will definitely air in time for you to come. If you're living around Burke, then you are absolutely invited to our Advent penance service, which is December 15th. It's a Thursday. I believe it's from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. We're going to have over a dozen priests here. So if you just maybe you're feeling a little uncomfortable, you're I'm really good friends with Father Bresnahan, I'd really rather not go to him. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. You can go to the bishop.
Softie. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't
and
understand.
wouldn't you also say, Father, I think, unfortunately, I personally know some people who've had a very negative confession experience and they're afraid to go back, or they don't leave feeling great after. They can reach out to us at the parish office and ask to speak to a priest, or speak to one of the staff, because if that's what's keeping you from coming, we want to be able to support you so that you can give it another chance.
Sure.
Agree with that.
And I mean, and to be fair, I mean, again, I don't know everybody's individual circumstances, right? But confession itself, I mean, I'm not sure what a positive experience in confession is, in the sense of I'm not supposed to feel good about my sins, if that makes some sense. Maybe a cathartic experience for sure, recognizing that I've done the thing that's very difficult. I've been vulnerable with God, and I've spoken the parts that I've struggled with. And I think we go in very nervous, and I don't know. I know that every priest has their sort of maybe bedside manner, but I think at the end of the day, the grace is larger than all of that. So
definitely.
You've had a situation where maybe you feel like the priest's bedside manner. I guess I always go back to when a kid is fighting with their parents, it's always the same thing, right? Either the kid's right or the kid's wrong. But if the kid's wrong, then oftentimes they're yeah, but I didn't like the way you said it, right? So we have that moment, and it's just, I guess what I'm getting at, what I'm really trying to tie the loop on is that if people have had a very difficult experience with maybe the bedside manner of the priest, not to think in the back of your mind that somehow your sin is less forgiven, or that Christ isn't able to work even in that difficult situation, right? Yeah, it may not feel great in that moment, but it's not
just like what you were saying before.
Exactly. It kind of ties everything all the way back to the beginning, right? And I think that's kind of the key. It's priests are not perfect people, and it doesn't hinge on the priest to forgive your sin, right? Like the priest has the authority to do it, and that's the way that the sacrament works. But at the end of the day, like it's not like the quality of the priest that means the quality of your confession, if that makes some sense.
Yeah,
So I think that's
good to hear.
a good reminder, right? I only say that because if it was, I feel just very bad for all the people who have gone to me for confession. But I feel good. It's great, but like, but Father's not perfect, so that nothing could be theologically farther from the truth, right? Is that the priest in so many ways is an instrument of God's grace, and sometimes it feels like more of an instrument, but the grace is there nonetheless, and God works, and God is a little bit bigger than the priest, so. So it's always a nice reminder that if you have had one of those difficult situations, or like maybe it wasn't what you expected or something like that, then at the end of the day, it's really helpful to remember that God is the one doing the work. So
Yep.
It also doesn't hinge on you. Right? Because the other trend that sometimes happens is people will put the burden of the quality of confession on themselves. If I didn't say every detail of the sin, believe me, Father doesn't want to hear the details. But if I don't tell Father every excruciating detail, or if I neglected something that I thought of later, then somehow,
right, you just forgot.
Yeah. So on one level, it doesn't hinge on the priest, but on the other level, it doesn't hinge on the person either. Right? We do our best.
Reminders.
Yeah, we do our best, and we turn towards him, and we allow him to forgive our sins. And the result, this goes back to everything. The result of all of it is the beginning, just a small foretaste of the joy that God has in store for us, right? Everything gears towards that idea of reconciling with God, turning back to him, and preparing our heart, which is also the theme of the third week of Advent, right? There's this theme in the gospel about preparing the way for the Lord, right? Making straight the highway for our God. So a beautiful little reflection as we kind of head into kind of the meat of Christmas proper.
Yeah, the meat. I like that. Yeah, the third week definitely feels like the meat of the Advent season.
Doesn't it? There's a big transition. We've kind of gone from almost a very abstract, the Lord is coming in a very general sense sometime in the future on a day you don't expect, to John the Baptist actually came and really did prepare for the coming of the Lord, right? And then next week we're going to get to even something more proximate, right?
Yeah.
So something definitely to look forward to.
And friends, if you're looking for like that one thing, maybe that like one thing to kind of introduce this Advent season is just to recognize how often John the Baptist is talked about in all these gospel messages. I just think it's I don't know if funny is the right word, but I'm just like, wow, this man is talked about a lot.
He's everywhere.
He's kind of important.
Yeah, so that means I don't know. Just
it's
kind of
almost like
interesting to
talking
reflect
about
on.
him sets the stage for someone else.
I love it. Do we have any kind of
God bless
final
you.
concluding thoughts for this episode, or?
Yeah, I mean, I have one final thought. I love the idea that joy is a central feature for this, because the joy that God has for us in heaven is infinitely better than the joy that we experience on earth. And that works in both directions, right? It works when things are great, to know that all the great things that we experience here, that's just the appetizer of what God has in store for us, right? And so the joy that we experience here in this Advent of the coming of the Lord is just a fraction of the joy that God actually has in store for us when we meet him face to face and we're with him forever in heaven, right? That joy is something that our brains and our minds can't even comprehend at this point. But it also gives us that encouragement even in those difficult times, in the suffering and in the struggle. And like we said at the beginning of the episode, that sometimes when things aren't going great, the temptation is to kind of think, well, then God doesn't love me, or I'm far away from him, or I need to do more, or something like that. And then this joy reminds us that even the temporary sufferings that we experience here on earth, they're just a stepping stone to what God actually has in store for us in heaven. So it gives us that hope of something we're looking forward to.
Absolutely. I love that. And Father, maybe next week, since we're running out of time for this week, maybe next week we can share about a saint who experienced that exact thing, what you're talking about, of all that build up to, all the build up and then
dun, dun. Not spoiler alert, but
Preview.
Preview.
Cliffhanger. There we go.
Cliffhanger,
Preview. All right. Tune in next week.
Next week we'll talk very practically about a saint who experienced exactly what Father just mentioned, because we're running out of time this week. But stay tuned for next week, and that'll lead us beautifully into the 4th week of Advent.
All right. Well, until then, God bless you.
Happy Advent.
Yeah, happy Advent, everybody. Thank you.